Thank you all for joining me. It's been a real pleasure to do these weekly talks. Speaking of lazy gardening, I've said kind of flippantly at the beginning, I was like, oh, I've got all kinds of talks that I've done all over the place. It'll be easy. I'll just put up the talks. But I'm usually talking to a group that's doesn't necessarily know the Arboretum. So it's, I have to change my tactics a little bit and always wind up doing more things. In fact, I was just adding a picture to my talk that I took about 30 or 40 minutes ago. So, it's always so exciting to new things. So I always want to chat about what's going on. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen and get started. It's probably good to mute yourself, and mostly because if you don't, you will forget that you're not unmuted, and you'll forget that you're not muted, and you'll have a conversation with somebody. That happens all the time. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen and get going. And if you have questions, you can unmute yourself and ask, or you can type it into the chat as well. And I will try and keep an eye on the chat while we're going on. All right. So, this talk, I kind of do it tongue in cheek. It's about being a lazy gardener, and it's all in how you look at things. This might be tips from a lazy gardener. My wife sometimes calls me a lazy gardener. That's usually in midsummer when the weeds start getting too high and it's too hot to go out and weed. But it also, I've heard very similar topics being talked about, as the science behind successful gardening, and it's really, the more you know something, the more you can make your life easier by dealing with the issue. So a lot of that is what I'm going to talk about in this is how to deal with difficult issues in the garden. I always had to put some glamour shots of the Arboretum in first, because if any of y'all like me, you're missing coming out to the Arboretum, although I am out at the Arboretum today, which is kind of nice. But the Arboretum is really looking beautiful. And, a lot of this book, other than coming from my wife who calling me a lazy gardener, it also, when the Arboretum was putting together this book, and I was writing this book, Gardening in the South, I looked at a lot of other books, and a lot of them, the things they were talking about really applied to people who spent all their time gardening, had somebody at home, they're written a while back, and, maybe a wife was at home during the day and had more time. And, a lot of what's in some of those old books is really, it's not realistic when you think about how people really, their time they have nowadays. People are busy and have a lot to do, and they want to garden, but don't necessarily want to spend all their time out there. So we are part of the university, and but we're self-funded almost entirely. So we do work a lot with students, and this really is not true young people to work in. We actually have over 3,300 active volunteers, and many of them are young at heart. And they really do a lot of work for us. They do a great job. And those students are now leaders in the industry. At least two of these folks have a hand in running family nurseries, and really a lot goes on with them, and they are fantastic. So we're hoping we can have our interns in soon this summer. We're not sure when they're going to be here, but it'll be a little sad for us if we don't get them in soon, because we really get a lot of energy from them, these young people. And we are part of the Department of Horticultural Science, so we are a living laboratory, and as such, we have not only horticulture students, but forestry and entomology and pathology, unfortunately, and ag engineering and ag education and plant biology, chemistry. I always tell people this, it cracks me up. You know, there's no botany at NC State. It's plant biology. And that's because when you're a rising junior or senior in high school, nobody's Googling botany. They're Googling biology because they want to be a vet or a marine biologist or something, and they get tricked into seeing plant biology. And then when anatomy and physiology proves to be a little bit tougher, then they can make that switch easily over to plant biology. And the students are great if you can give them some clear direction. So this is my confession. I am a lazy gardener. Hi, my name's Mark. I'm a lazy gardener. I know a lot of people probably on this phone love gardening, love puttering around in the garden and working in the garden. And, when it's, 55 to 65 degrees outside and I'm under house arrest or quarantine or whatever you want to call it, I like puttering around in the garden. But I love plants, and I love to be surrounded by plants and immersed in plants. But I don't always love the gardening part of it. It's really, I garden so I can have plants around me. I know a lot of people who garden so they can garden, but that's just not me. So I like to look for ways to take shortcuts. I'm not this much, I'm not going for plastic grass. And if you look on here, you see this is a British company. We think the English all know how to garden, but not necessarily. They're selling plastic grass over there. But the one thing I don't really talk about is turf, because if you look at my house, come to my house, I have terrible turf, which drives my wife crazy. It's just not where I want to expend my energy. And I always tell people that turf is the single most labor-intensive part of gardening. You've got to weed it and spray it and fertilize it and water it and edge it and blow it and, and over and over and over again. Every week you've got to mow it. I could probably keep my entire garden mowed, weeded for the amount of time that I used to spend mowing when I had a big yard. And if you are into competitive lawn bowling, or you have dogs or children who need to run around on it, or you entertain a lot outside, great, have a big lawn. But the way we've been programmed, and this is how I was taught in a design class, you have your plan for your garden or for your house. You have your house in the middle, and then you're going to do the plant, and it's all grass. And you decide, where do I want to put beds? Where do I want to put plants? And you go through, where I learned, you go through a series of things. This is the lower care plants back here, they're screening, and you got more intensive care right up here by your patio and by your front door. Well, we need to kind of change that concept, flip that, and say, all right, here's our house. Everything else is vegetated. Where do I need turf? All right, I need some turf out in front, because if you're like me, your wife will kill you if you don't have some turf. I need some turf around back, because I like to have barbecues and I like to have people out there. Or I need some area for my grandkids to kick a soccer ball around. But don't think it's all lawn except for where I plant. And it doesn't have to be labor-intensive planting. It can be, more like a woodland planting, trees and a ground cover, something like that, that will take up that space. But, you know, people say, well, planting out a ground cover is expensive. And I say, well, yeah, but, you know, owning a lawnmower is expensive too. You know, if you go with one of these like drought tolerant grasses instead of turf, if you're not going on it, but you want kind of that look, you know, something like a purple love grass, or you know, one of these drought tolerant clumpers. Now that's not going to be good to walk on or play soccer on, but you can walk on it a little bit, not a whole lot. Don't want to play soccer on it, but you know what? Once this is established, you never have to water it. It's extremely drought tolerant. The only maintenance you have to do is, you know, once a year in late winter, early spring, ask your neighbor if you can borrow their lawnmower, bring it over, put it at its highest setting, run over it real quick, and then bring his lawnmower back. And, you know, that's it. That's basically it for the year. So you can get kind of the effect of a lawn that you're not walking on without doing it. And yes, it costs more to install that because you have to buy individual plants or plugs, but in the long run, you save money. One thing we're experimenting with that I'm really excited at how well it's turning out is a flowering lawn. And, you know, this is not a meadow. This is a flowering lawn. Everything's, even in flower, is below 6 inches, 4 to 6 inches tall or lower. And this is a picture I took not even an hour ago. This is it. You can see up front here, we've got a bunch of thyme that's flowering. We've got some ice plant that's coming into flower. We've got this really low dianthus. We've got some phlox in here. We've got Veronica waterberry blue in here. We've got some other thymes that haven't started flowering yet. We've got ajugas in here, really low ajugas. We've just got this whole mix of things. Some of what we planted didn't work out. Some is turning out amazing, but we're getting this gorgeous tapestry of not just flowers, but even if nothing were in flower, you're getting this tapestry of textures and colors of green. You know, green is a color in place in an area where we used to have lawn, and you can walk on it. If you walk on it a lot, you're going to damage it. But if you want to cut, you know, from here to here, no problem. As long as you don't, you know, make this a cattle path and walk there every day, you're going to be fine. You know, you can go in there. And it was really pretty simple. We killed off all the grass and killed off all the weeds. We took our time doing that. You know, killed it, waited, killed it again, killed it lightly, waited for the seeds to come up, killed them again, and then planted it. And the first year we did pretty regular weeding, but now we do almost no weeding because there's no open ground for weeds in there. There is one weed right there. I noticed that when I was out there. I should have pulled it. I did not. But yeah, the flowering lawn is great, and I'm trying to convince my wife to get rid of our lawn out front and to do that, and around the edge of it where my beds are and I garden, you know, my real flower beds are, I'll do a stone kind of pathway all the way around the edge so I can get everywhere, and then have the rest of it be this flowering lawn. I don't know if she's going to go for it, but I'm hoping. Where you do use lawn, like I said, do it intentionally, not as the default. This is Moore Farms Botanic Garden, and you know, this is this perfect circle of lawn, but it's where 4 or 5 different paths meet. So it's this node, it's a meeting point. They can have small programs out there, but it's intentional. It's not because nothing else is there. There is lawn there because they wanted and needed it, whereas other areas are planted or left natural. And you know, I travel all over, and I have this huge collection of keep off the grass signs. The Chinese have the very best keep off the grass signs. They say all kinds of things that are, you know, about not hurting the plants and saving the environment, keep off the grass. And they always boggle my mind because in my head, there is no reason to have turf except for to walk on. That is the only purpose of turf, is if you're not going to walk on it, run on it, whatever, why have it? You can do a lot more interesting things. So this is a great garden. And keep in mind this picture. I'm going to show another picture of this towards the end of a different part of this garden, but you can see how densely it's planted. But look at this, that nice lawn gives your eye that restful space that you kind of need in a garden that's this intensely planted. So as a lazy gardener, that doesn't mean doing nothing. One thing that kind of true in any part of life is that you gotta put some capital in at the beginning to make your life easier long term. And the best thing you can do is improve your soil. Number one thing, improve your soil. And the number one way to do that is with the organic matter. Compost, whatever kind of organic matter. You want to get carbon in the soil. Carbon's what's doing the work for you, and carbon is carbon. So I'm sure you've seen something like this, right? You do a layer of sticks, 4 to 6 inches, then a layer of brown, then a layer of green, maximum 2 to 4 inches, then brown, then green, then brown. Keep it moist as a wrung out sponge. Use a lid on it, keep it covered. This is the stupidest thing that has ever been perpetrated on the gardening public. If you see one of these things, run away. I don't know about you, but my garden doesn't give me alternating layers of brown and green material to compost. And unlike most people probably on this program, I don't go to the nursery and get a bunch of plants and then have them at my house in like a mini nursery at my house, because I don't water plants. When I bring a plant home, it goes in the ground. I can always move it later, but it gets planted because I'm not going to water it, and it stands a fighting chance if I put it in the ground and water it once. It's got more of a chance to live. But if it's in a pot, I'm never gonna water it. So and I'll tell you, after 25 years of doing this professionally for 40, 60, 80 hours a week, when plants die, they break down. They compost. That's what they do. That's a pro tip there. Dead plants will break down. So, all you need to do is make a pile. I mean, this is great, but at my house, I live on a cul-de-sac, at the end of a cul-de-sac. I have woods behind me. I just make a pile in the woods. But what you want is you're always going to have 2 piles, compost piles, when you're making compost. You have one that you start with, and if you're starting new compost from scratch, you throw your green material in there, throw a shovel full of garden soil in there, because you need those microbes in there to break things down. That just gets things going quicker, and you just keep piling stuff on there. You can water it and keep it wet as a wrung out sponge, but if I don't water my plants at home, there is no way that I'm watering my compost pile. And if it gets dry, it stops composting. And when it gets wet again, guess what? It starts composting again. If it starts to smell like ammonia, that means that it needs oxygen in there. So then you need to get in there with a pitchfork and kind of turn it over and aerate it a little bit. But if it never smells like ammonia, then you don't need to do that. And so you have one pile that you do, and once you get that pile piled up, then you start a second pile. So this over here is the second pile. This one is fully composted. And I've shown that picture and people say, wait, that's not composted. I know what compost looks like. I get it in bags, or I get a truckload of it delivered to my house, and it's this beautiful black crumbly gold that I put in my garden, and it's so wonderful. I want to roll around in it. And yeah, if you buy it from a place that does compost, they have everything out in these big long windrows, and they keep a track of the temperature in the center of them, and they turn it with big machines. And then before it goes out, it goes through a sifter, and everything that looks like it once was a plant gets put back in the compost pile, and you don't get any of that. Well, that's not going to happen for you. Your compost pile is not big enough to generate that kind of heat. You're not caring for it in that way, and you're not sifting it. But this is all broken down organic matter. This stuff is great. Just spread it on top of your soil, turn it into new bed, rototill it into new beds, dig it into new beds, whatever. It will really build your soil over time. The other truth about composting is that actually very few people have big enough gardens that they produce enough compost to do much with in their garden. It takes a big garden, because one of these things filled with fresh material is going to break down to about 8 or 12 inches on the bottom of here. It's not going to be a lot of material. So if you live in a place where the city will pick up your yard waste and will compost it, and then you can go pick up the compost, do that. Don't feel bad about it. People feel guilty about that. No, that's great. If you don't have a truck, go to Home Depot rents trucks. You go there and rent their truck, drive down to the city place, they fill it up, you bring it to your house, unload it. It's great. You don't need to worry about that. But you still have things that are still look like compost. Still look like plants. And like I said, carbon is carbon. If you're buying it, whatever you can get. If you live up in Maine and they have lobster compost, great. It's all about adding organic matter. Carbon's carbon. Whatever you have, wherever you get it, that's just fine. So, I always get asked is, I have a woodland, or I've already planted stuff and I can't dig everything out. How do I, what can I do to help improve my soil? This is the best thing. And this is, I gotta say this, I took this from Bree Arthur, who's a local person who, if you don't know her, she does foodscaping, vegetable gardening. She's gonna be doing a class for us online very shortly, so be on the lookout for that. But she taught me about this. All of this under these trees in this bed are tillage radishes, or if you're into Asian cuisine, daikon radishes. They're the same thing. Daikon radish, that's all that is. What you do is, for a bed, a new bed, or a bed that the soil isn't very good in there, you can buy just bulk seed. Always try and buy bulk tillage radish seeds. This is something that farmers used to do before planting pasture grasses. Get tillage radishes. You can get daikon radish seed, but it's more expensive than tillage radish. They're probably scooping them out of the same big bin of it, because it's the same thing. And then you just spread those in the fall, September, October. You spread them in a bed. They'll grow lush over the winter. They'll look like this in the spring. You can harvest a few if you want to eat them, but you just otherwise let them die right there in place. They'll die when it gets hot. And you can either then come in and till those radishes, which are filled with water and everything, till the tops and the bottoms into the soil. Or what I do a lot of times is I'll just leave it, let it all break down. If the tops look really ugly, you can go in and mow the tops down and kind of chew them up with a lawnmower like that. And then by fall the next year, it'll be ready for planting. If you till it, you can go ahead and plant that spring in there, and it's great. And over winter, it looks beautiful. And you can do this around trees and shrubs. I've got a woodland that's mostly deciduous trees. So I go in there after the leaves have fallen. So I get in there a little bit later than ideal. I'll rake up an area bare and I will throw those out. And so I'm just kind of moving through and doing one bed at a time, improving the soil that way. It is fantastic. It's really been great. And it's still clay soil. There's only so much organic matter I've added with this, but it's broken it up and it's gotten it started. So I'll use this, and then over the summer, so it's gone through the winter. It's died back, flowered and is dying back right now. And then in that bed, I'll spread compost over the top of it. And as everything kind of breaks down, it'll really go in there. And then in the fall, when I go to plant in there, I've got 4 to 6 inches that are pretty darn good. So, we have great volunteers out here at the Arboretum, and one of the jobs that they do a lot of is mulching. And we mulch with partially decomposed, partially composted leaves, which are great because they're already partially composted. They'll keep breaking down and become compost right there in the garden. Now, a lot of people, when they go to choose a mulch, what they're looking for is something that's going to last a long, long time. And that's fine. But when you do that, you're providing less benefit to the soil. So I use a really highly shredded type of mulch in my home garden because I want it to break down. In my woodland areas, I'll take leaves and rake them up, and I'll chew them up with my lawnmower and then spread them out, and they'll break down quicker that way because they've been chewed up in the lawnmower. And so the quicker your mulch breaks down, it's basically just kind of slow release compost. So it helps to have, many very helpful volunteers helping you with that for your garden. But it is important. I used to work at another garden, and my boss in our rose garden, we would rake out all the mulch every winter to get rid of all the overwintering fungal spores and everything, and then put down new mulch. And if we had 3,000 roses, it was a big rose garden. And every year he would say, why don't you put down that rubber mulch? Because it'll last and we don't have to replace it. And it'll be a one-time investment. So I was like, no, Don, you're not getting it. He was supposed to be a plant guy, but boy, he didn't get it. We all know not to do this, right? That's no good. But people don't know why they're mulching. They have no idea. All they know incorrectly, but all they think they know is that more is better. The more I put down, the better it is. And that's not the case. Here's for in the Southeast, not in the North, but in the Southeast, we are mulching to prevent weeds and to keep moisture in the soil, right? It's funny, you go to England and they don't mulch. They just have bare soil around their plants. And they'll go out with a little scuffle hoe and very nice and politely scuffle away all their weeds once a month. They're very polite British weeds. We do not. We have, American weeds that, they're this tall the first time you look at them, you turn back around, they're 3 feet tall. And then the next week you need a chainsaw to take them out. But the annual weeds that come up, those weed seeds need light to germinate. They're quick successional plants. That's why they all pop up. It's like a tree falling in the forest. When you do that, all these seeds come up because all of a sudden they're exposed to sunlight. So you want your mulch thick enough to block light. Now, if you mulch with big old pine bark nuggets, those big things, I don't see those too often. You got to go deep, like 4 to 6 inches, because you're not blocking light otherwise. If you're going with something that's finer, like the real shredded stuff I use, I put on, 1.5 inches, 2 inches at most, so that no light goes through. And you want to keep it as thin as possible because the other side is keeping moisture in. And, you may have done this experiment way back in, geology class or physical sciences, where you have clay on top of sand in an aquarium or a jar, and you pour water in, and the water kind of sits in that top layer and doesn't want to go into the bottom layer unless you really saturate it. And then maybe you did the opposite experiment where you put sand, coarse sand on top and fine clay on the bottom and did the same thing. And what you think is that the water will go through that clay and then go right through the sand, but it won't. Water doesn't like to move to different type of pore sizes. It'll tend to stay in that clay and not go into the sand. So whichever way you do it, where you have that difference in porosity, water tends to stop. So if you have a thinner layer, the water will go down there and then kind of stop. But when that top gets saturated, it'll go into the soil. If you have a real thick layer of mulch, the water will go down there and stop at that change in porosity at the soil mulch layer, and it will build up in your mulch before it goes in. And so the thicker you are, the more reservoir you have in that mulch. And all that stuff it'll evaporate, but also that thick mulch that's full of moisture, that's a great spot for weed seeds to germinate. Now they're easier to pull out when they germinate in your mulch, but you're not stopping those weed seeds from germinating. But in that thinner mulch, it'll dry out. The water gets pushed down, it dries out, weed seeds can't germinate in it. So you've blocked light, and you're providing the maximum moisture at that intersection. So, and that's, if you do it right, it works really well. Now, perennial weeds, if you don't kill those off with a weed killer or pull them out and get rid of the root, they'll come up through your mulch. I'm talking about annual weeds that you're blocking the weeds germinating. And the other thing is, people always talk about invasives. The worst invasives are bad horticultural practices. They just spread and spread and spread. All right. Some of you have probably heard me talking about, if you've heard me talk before, about cheap plants, buying cheap plants. And gardeners are the worst at this. They'll go to the garden center and go to the back with the 75% off plants, and they'll find a plant that should have been thrown away, and they'll buy it for cheap. And unlike me, they'll actually water their plant and take care of it and plant it. And they will forget that they bought a junky plant like this. And in a year, 2 years, 3 years, when it dies, they'll blame the plant, they'll blame the nursery, they'll blame themselves, whatever. But the truth is, they bought a terrible plant. The example I always use is Daphne. I will talk about Daphne, winter Daphne, because it's a fantastic plant. If any of you don't know it, it's a evergreen shrub, grows about 3 feet tall, 4 feet wide or so. It can get a little bigger than that. It's beautiful evergreen, doesn't have any problems, has the most fragrant flowers, pink buds open up to white flowers in the winter that will scent, a square city block, one plant. I mean, they are amazing. But they only live for about 5 years typically. Sometimes you can keep them alive longer, but 5 years is about how long they live. And people say, I don't buy Daphne because I can only keep it alive for 5 years and it costs me, $30. And yet they have flats of annuals that they buy knowing they're going to die, and they've spent way more than $30. Or they go to dinner at Dead Lobster and have terrible seafood and spend $40, $50 and don't think twice about it. But $30 for a plant that's going to give you joy for 5 years and then die, not linger, but just die overnight, that is a great deal. $6 a year for a great plant. If you buy good plants, they will give you more value than almost anything else you buy. Plants are so cheap. They take years to produce, and you get them for next to nothing. So don't be cheap with plants. Buy good, high-quality plants, and, some will die, yes. But if you plant a tree, it's probably going to be there long after you're gone, either gone from the earth or gone from that house. There's not many other investments you make that really have that long-term capacity. So don't buy cheap plants. As extension agent, I get, or not an agent, but I have an extension appointment. I get, emails with pictures like this, and people say, what do I do for my tree? And I say, you want to prune that about 1 inch at ground level. Plants are cheap, get a new plant. Or this is my favorite. Got this with an email that said, my plant gets this every year. What do I spray on it? My response is, we grow 7,000 different plants here at the Arboretum right now. Over the years, we have grown many, many, many dozens of thousands of different types of plants. If your plant does this every year, gets insects every year, don't spray it with something. Get rid of it and get a good plant. People, I'll tell people to rip out a plant and they say, but it's still alive. It's still healthy. I'm like, yeah, but you hate it. People won't get rid of a plant that they don't like. No, get rid of it. My two favorite things in gardening, one planting plants and the other one ripping plants out. And I'll rip one plant out and then I'll look around and say, if I rip that out and that out and that out, I could plant a whole new thing here. I love that. But don't put up with plants that don't perform well. Share a real quick story. You may know the name Pamela Harper. She's a garden writer. She is one of the most fabulous gardeners ever. She's a lovely woman from England and lives in Eastern Virginia. And I was talking to her maybe 6 months after her husband had passed away, and she was devoted to her husband, just absolutely devoted. And in her garden, the centerpiece is where the driveway turnaround, right in the middle of that turnaround, is kind of the real centerpiece for her garden. And it was a year where the magnolias were spectacular. So we were talking about how beautiful the magnolias were. And she said, oh, yes, Peter loved the magnolias, loved the saucer magnolia. We had one in the turnaround, and he absolutely adored it. It reminded him of being a child in England. He had them all around his home. It was his favorite plant in the garden. And she paused, and then she said, but I had it taken out recently because it really only flowered well once every 3 years, so it wasn't pulling its weight. So, I mean, talk about being brutal. That plant was not pulling its weight. It only flowered once every 3 years. Once her husband was gone, that plant was out. No sentimental attachment to a plant if it isn't doing its job. I don't personally spray any insecticides at home. We almost never do here in the garden. Every once in a while, if we have a flare of something unusual that we know isn't going to be a yearly occurrence, we may do spot treatments. So, I look at this and say, well, I like flowering hibiscus. They keep growing even with their leaves eaten. So I say, well, it's a nice lace leaf perennial hibiscus. If it gets too bad, I'll cut all the stems down and let it regrow. Do the same thing with cannas. If they get bad leaf rollers, just cut them to the ground, get rid of the tops, and let them regrow. There is one kind of home remedy for Japanese beetles. If you grow a lot of hibiscus or purple leaf plums or roses or anything that Japanese beetles attack, you can grow 4 o'clocks. 4 o'clocks, the Mirabilis jalapa. You can get little seed packs of them probably at any garden center around right now. Just spread them out, they'll pop up. For us, they usually are perennial. Farther north, they're not perennial, but for us, they'll form big tubers. And Japanese beetles love to eat them, but they're toxic to Japanese beetles. So they won't get rid of all your Japanese beetles, but they'll reduce the pressure on your other plants. And 4 o'clocks are really pretty plants to have around. They'll just kind of self-sow around the garden, and you just pull them up wherever you don't want them. Of course, this is the number one thing that everybody asks us about are the deer, right? What is it? Deer proof? Is it deer proof? I grew up in rural South Central Virginia. We had a way to deal with deer. It involved a shotgun, and it was delicious. I can't do that in the city. So I wrote a column for years, for about 14 years for one of the Virginia newspapers, the Virginian Pilot. And every once in a while, I'd have to answer this question because every week I got the question. And, the best thing you can do for deer is put up a 10-foot deer fence around your property. And then I tell people, another good thing to do is to get a good dog. A good dog will, they pee all over the place, so the deer get that scent and they'll bark at them and chase them off, and eventually the deer will learn to stay away. And then people would send me pictures and say, and I would respond and say, I told you to get a good dog. That's not a good dog. It's a bad dog. Any dog that will do that, not good. But you know, for me, the number one garden pest, bar none, are mosquitoes. When the mosquitoes get bad over the summer, forget it. I'm done. I'll come back out and I'll start gardening again when things cool off. They drive me crazy. Another kind of home remedy, if you don't like to spray yourself down with things, is if you grow American Beautyberry, Calicarpa americana, kind of a big shrub with small lavender flowers and then glossy purple fruits like BBs. You can just take the leaves and rub it on you, and it seems to work for me as well as Deep Woods Off without getting me all sticky and gross and whatever. So you know, I like to grow that. I got to grow it down in a woodland area, and I'll just grab some leaves and rub them on me, and that'll do the job often. Funnily enough, it's just the American Beautyberry. It's not the Asian beautyberries. The Asian ones don't seem to work. So diseases. People don't understand how to deal with diseases in large measure, although maybe this COVID-19 is helping us out. There are three things you need to have a disease, right? You need a susceptible host. Well, let's take the coronavirus, for instance. We are extremely susceptible to it. That is the issue with it. That's why it's such a problem, is we are extremely susceptible. You need a conducive environment for it to be around. So, you know, that's why like the flu tends to go away in the winter. One, well, there's two things. One, it doesn't perform as well, but two, we're outdoors and spread out a little bit more. We're not all jammed inside, so the environment's less conducive. And three, you need the pathogen. It's got to be around. So if you have all that, you have the disease. So let's take one that is a common one: powdery mildew on dogwoods, right? Dogwoods get powdery mildew. But there are some out there now where the host is less susceptible. Take our native dogwood. There's a selection called Kay's Appalachian Spring. It's less susceptible to powdery mildew. So you haven't done anything other than put in a different plant there, a less susceptible host. You may have a spot that stays a little bit damp, and you really, really want to plant an azalea there, a rhododendron there. Well, they won't do it. They're going to get Phytophthora. So you can put in a less susceptible plant. Or with your dogwood, you can then go, you've got your Kay's Appalachian Spring. It's much more powdery mildew resistant, and you can plant it out in the open where it gets good air circulation, water doesn't stay on the leaves, it dries off quickly. So the environment is less conducive to powdery mildew. Haven't done a thing about the pathogen. And that's the problem. Everybody wants to kill the pathogen. That's what you want to do. But that's the hardest thing you can do in the garden. Fungicides they tend to be pretty nasty to spray. There are some more organic controls, sulfur and things like that, but they can be very, very difficult to control. Other diseases, again, very difficult to control. Phytophthora, the root rot pathogens, they're in our soils. They're in all of our soils. So what do? You choose a less susceptible host and make the environment less conducive, or you might, if you still wanted that rhododendron and you had that wet spot, maybe you have to fill that in and mound it up and get it so it's not a wet spot. You change the drainage around there. You do things to make the environment more conducive. But if you're going to try and keep that plant alive in a low wet spot, that rhododendron, it's not going to happen. One of the big ones, roses, they are susceptible to everything. And here in the South, we have every disease, that black spot and powdery mildew and everything that roses get. And so what do we do with roses? We plant them in rose gardens. You know, you don't have people with viburnum gardens, right? People don't have viburnum gardens, but people have rose gardens. We jam all those roses in together so that a disease can move from one plant to the next plant to the next plant a lot easier. We have made the environment even more conducive. We've got the susceptible host. We know we have the pathogen, and we made the environment more conducive. If I took the advice of my old boss and put down rubber mulch in my rose garden, I wouldn't be able to get rid of all those overwintering spores. And so I would have more pathogens. So that circle would get bigger. I'd have even more disease. If I had $1 for every time somebody said, I grow a rose, you should grow this rose, and they'll tell me the rose. You should grow this rose. It never gets a disease. I've been growing it for years, and it's great. And I'll say, oh, interesting. I've grown that before. It's gotten a lot of disease. How many roses do you grow? How many other roses? Oh, I just grow that one. Well, yeah, if you grow one rose and your neighbor isn't growing a lot of roses, you don't have a problem, because you don't have, you're not making the environment so conducive as we do in a jam-packed rose garden. You know, another great thing for the lazy gardener is adding a little bit of formality. This is, I showed you that garden at the beginning that with the turf path that was so densely planted. It is a garden that kind of can get out of control at times. But the person there has this kind of 20-foot or so circle of lawn right off his porch here. He has this 20-foot circle of lawn. And then the garden starts, and it's wild out there. And every year that lawn it's kept perfect, you know, because it's easy to do that in that small space. And every year he will dig up a piece of it and do something in it, something very formal. The year before this, he had dug up a perfect circle in the middle, put a pot, probably that same pot in there, and then had kind of these plantings come out from around it in a very formal French style. And it took some maintaining to do that, but really that's pretty easily to maintain. All you got to do, something like this, all you have to do is, you know, walk by and weed it, and it's right there by your porch, so it's easy. And because of that formality, all the wildness that was around it looked kind of intentional. Like, you know, he wouldn't have left this craziness if he wasn't, you know, intentionally doing this. This formal part makes it intentional. My daughter went with me one time when I was giving a talk like this, and I said that, and she came back and said, if anybody has read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, you know, there's a whole thing where you always have your towel, because if you're traveling and you have a towel, people will see you have your towel. So obviously you have a toothbrush and everything else you need. And if you don't have that other stuff, then you must have lost it because you have your towel. So that's what this is. That's his towel is this formal part. So the rest of the garden can look like a mess, but he must mean to take care of it, because otherwise, why would he have this one part so formal? Yeah, we were talking a little bit before we started about pots. I don't water plants, so I put succulents in pots, things like hens and chicks and agaves and things, because I don't have to water them, and it makes my life a lot easier. You know, that's just, and they also look beautiful. I mean, that's gorgeous. A word about vegetable gardening, and this is just a word about it. If you want to learn how to vegetable garden, be on the lookout for the sign up for Bree's class that we're going to be doing online. But I've known too many people. I don't vegetable garden. I have Stockholm syndrome or something, survivor's guilt. I don't know what it is from being a child and having to work in my mom's vegetable garden. So I having to weed in there. I didn't work much other than weed. So I know people who want to say, I want to start vegetable gardening. I've got a new house, or, you know, a tree came down, I have some light, I want to start vegetable gardening. And this is immediately what they want to do. They'll have a design, and it will be, you know, they are growing sweet corn and 10 different types of heirloom tomatoes, and they're growing all kinds of different squashes and all kinds of herbs and everything, this whole elaborate thing. And it's great. They get it all, you know, prepped and tilled up, and they plant in the early spring, and they get some of their early cold crops in, and it's great. It comes up and it's doing well. and they stay on top of the winter weeds that are coming up. And then it gets hot, and those summer weeds start coming in, and it becomes less and less pleasant to go out because it's hotter and hotter, and it, you know, is covered in weeds, and the insects are eating all the plants, and they give up. They're like, I hate doing this, and it's too hard, and I don't like it. So when people say they're going to start vegetable gardening, I tell them to do this. Find a sunny spot in your existing garden. You know, plant a few. What is it you really want? You want tomatoes so you can make a BLT? Plant a handful of tomatoes. You know, plant a cucumber plant or a squash plant or two, but just a little bit, and nearby where you're going to, near your house where you're going to go do it. And they do that, and they can stay on top of it. They can keep control of it. They can go out, and in 10 minutes, they can have it weeded and harvested, you know, after work, and they get to enjoy that fresh produce. And then they kind of get a sense for what it takes, and so then they can go bigger after that. But if you start big, it's really difficult to maintain over the summer. You've got to really find out if you love doing that kind of work when it gets hot and gross. You know, and people think this is what their vegetable gardens should look like. I blame the Victory Garden. They always had things that looked so nice and neat. But they had full-time gardeners who did the Victory Garden. Then they'd come in and film something and, you know, dig up with the stuff that the full-time gardener had taken care of. You know, you don't need to do that. Your greens, scatter them out. The way to thin them is to pull some out, you know, twist off the bottoms, throw it in the compost heap, take off the tops, bring them inside. You don't have to go out and you know, separate them, make sure things are spaced apart. Just throw your seed down and you know, and let it grow. It doesn't have to be neat and tidy. People are too obsessed with tidiness. You know, my mother's vegetable garden, she realized, you know, she kept it weeded and you know, meticulous for years, and she loved the produce. We ate basically like vegetarians all summer long out of the garden. But you know, we had so much produce that we started, you know, people would run and hide when they'd see us with a grocery bag coming up because they knew we had a bunch of zucchini and things for them. Well, you know, at a certain point, she started getting tired of it and started just letting the weeds grow, you know, let weeds grow kind of down between the aisles, and would walk on top of them and kind of beat them down that way. You know, every once in a while, maybe run a mower down there or a string trimmer to keep them down. But you know what? It reduced some of the harvest, but we still had enough for our family. She didn't reduce the amount she was planting, just the amount of work she was putting into maintaining it. And it still worked out for us. And our friends didn't run and hide from us. So, you know, a garden should definitely reflect who you are. This is somebody I know, and this looks kind of wild and woolly, but it's the most absolutely meticulously maintained garden. There's not a leaf out of place. Everything is perfect in there, and that's how that person wants it. Or Montrose in Hillsborough in the winter with the snowdrops just covering the grounds under the trees. It's spectacular, but serene and calm, much different than it is during the summer. What I aspire to one day when I stop being a lazy gardener is this garden. This is a real plantsman's garden, but everything is just so perfectly maintained, perfectly thought out, really beautiful. And it doesn't have to be about the plants. I'm a plant person. I want my plants around me. But this garden, they did not want ornamental grasses here. It wasn't because they wanted these grasses. They had this sculpture of these squid, which is an awesome sculpture. But they wanted movement and, you know, all behind it. So they planted those grasses there to give that movement. The grasses had a function other than just because they wanted to use ornamental grasses. I would plant ornamental grasses because I wanted the ornamental grasses. They want it for the effect, and that's fine. I used to put this slide in my talks, and I would talk about color echoes. You know, orange. You got the orange mulch and the orange pumpkins, and even orange window vine, and make fun of it. And at some point, I thought, this was somebody who lived near me in Virginia, lived around the corner. I thought, who am I to make fun of this person? They they love this garden. The woman spent hours out there. I would always see her out, and everything was trimmed just the way she liked it. You know, every year she would whitewash the stones that surrounded her plant beds that I would have called tacky. You know, but she loved it. And the garden should be a personal reflection. We do not all have to have, you know, a lawn and some foundation plants and maybe one shade tree and one dogwood in our front yard. You know, they can be eclectic, they can be different. And the ones that are, even if they're not my taste, now are the ones that I really am drawn to. I was back in Norfolk in October, and I drove by my old garden, there was like one tree there that I had planted that was still there. Everything else was gone. And I was like, well, that's sad. And then I turned the corner and I went by this house, and it was all the plants were gone, and it looked just like every other house around there, and had a for rent or a for sale sign out there. And it just crushed me because that woman whose vision was there in that garden was gone. It just absolutely made me sad. And I never talked to her. I wish I had talked to her. But I think that's amazing. The other way to be a lazy gardener is just you know, change your attitude. You know, what's a weed? A weed is a plant where you don't want it. Well, if you decide you want it, it's no longer a weed. I know people who you know, do the foraging stuff, and they love chickweed. They eat chickweed by the bucketfuls. So it's no longer a weed if you love it. You know, and then there's always, you can go the fake route. You can ceramic bamboos and metal palms and plastic mugo pines and espaliered magnolias if you really want. So thank y'all all for allowing me to talk about lazy gardening. I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm happy to respond to anything. Y'all just let me know. I'm going to try and stop the sharing of my screen, and so we can talk.
I think I know the answer. Oops. I think I know the answer to this. I don't want to hear it. I want to plant some seeds, but I've already put down mulch, so I guess I have to pull back all the mulch.
You got to pull back the mulch, yeah.
Yes, I thought that was going to be the answer I didn't want to get.
What was the name of the stuff you planted for Japanese beetles?
It is, they're called 4 o'clocks, and I'm right now in the chat, I'm putting the scientific name. Rhabulus jalapa from Mexico.
And they smell wonderful.
Yeah, they're great. They are great. We're best to plant elephant ears here in the triangle. They'll take some shade, but what they really want is sun and lots of moisture. That's where you get the biggest and best. So you can do part shade, but they really, if ideally, I guess, all but late afternoon, you know, the real hottest afternoon sun. But yeah, I try and get them out where it's pretty shiny, pretty sunny.
I steal my neighbors' bags of leaves that they very carefully bagged up and put them on my compost heap all year long.
Yeah.
Mark, I was wondering, so I had asked this on the chat too. I didn't know if anyone saw it, but Chris was saying gravel can retain water, because I was saying, what about the succulents I just planted? If it rains, do I have to cover them or anything? And I don't have gravel in them. I just have, so the pots are big, so I kind of layered the bottom with big stones because I needed to fill it up somehow. Yeah. And then I put pebbles, maybe the size of the top of my thumb, in there, mixed with mostly cactus soil. So it has mostly cactus soil, but just some pebbles in there. I didn't know if I had to repot them or they should be rain.
You know, if when you water it, it drains well, that's all you need is drainage. Yeah, you should be fine.
Okay.
Yeah, I was under the impression that you just had a normal sized container and made a layer of gravel. Because what you want height for better drainage. So if you have a 12-inch tall pot, but the bottom 4 inches are gravel, you've made a boundary layer in there, and that can stop some drainage.
Yeah.
No, I didn't use any gravel. The only gravel I used is my indoor cacti, and they do better in that 'cause they're indoors.
No, that works. I always tell people, like in the garden, it's all about trying to make sure things drain. And if with people are doing a new bed and they say, I'm bringing in, a lot of compost, and some people will just take that compost and put it right on the soil and then go. I tell people to go in and, till up the new bed, put in a thin, a layer of compost over it, till that shallowly, and then you can put the rest of the stuff on top and till it in as deep as you can. But then you get this, it's all about getting, the transitions not to be really abrupt. Any other questions?
If you have a place where you've been planting Shasta daisies, they did fine for a long time, and then they started getting sort of what looks like root rot, does that mean there's probably just Phytophthora there and I should plant something else?
It could be several things. It's not necessarily Phytophthora. As long as the soil isn't staying wet, Shasta daisies are not really susceptible to, that's not really a problem. Sometimes it's southern blight problem. It's really hard to say what the problem is, but if it seems like they're having a fungal problem, I would dig them out. Make sure when you dig them out that there's nothing going on in the soil under there that would cause that, like it isn't holding water there. And then I would plant something not in the aster family.
Yep.
There.
Okay.
Do you, when you showed us the picture of your lawn that you turned into multiple flowers and things like that, do you have a list that you could share with us of the things that are working well with that?
Yes.
I have a list of what is in the garden right now. Chris, I can get it to Chris, and he can put it somewhere.
It was beautiful. I love the idea.
Yeah.
And I believe the first Plantsman's Tour short that we posted online on the YouTube channel was about the flowering lawn. That was one of the little videos that we did while we're closed. We're doing one a week on Tuesdays, and I think the first one was the flowering lawn.
Can you walk on that?
You can walk on it, to maintain or whatever, but it's not. You wouldn't want to plant a flowering lawn where you were gonna, around your patio where you were gonna entertain, have people standing around on it. But you can walk on it, light foot traffic.
Okay, thank you.
Mark,
Yes.
my whole entire neighborhood's hellebores are infested with aphids,
Really?
and they're really bad. Any suggestions?
Well, there are chemicals that can be sprayed for aphids. I don't keep up with chemicals, honestly, and I don't like to recommend any because I'm typically recommending stuff from 15 years ago when I was actually having to spray stuff and keep track of that kind of thing. So I don't want to suggest a good garden center or your extension agent could help you. That's something I've never seen, is a big infestation of aphids on hellebores. It's interesting.
It's all over.
What you could do is cut them all back. Just cut all the leaves off. I know new leaves are coming out now. It'll slow down your hellebores. They probably won't bloom quite as well next year, but they will put up new foliage and survive and be fine.
Okay, somebody just suggested soap, and I've tried that, and it just didn't cut it. And if they're on the plant and you wash it off, or are they now in the soil, or do aphids live in the soil?
I know. I mean, they need to be on plants to get their sustenance. I don't know how long they can live in the soil, but typically, you knock a aphid once they're adult aphids, they don't really crawl back up much at all.
Okay.
Is this talk going to be post it. I have a friend I want to make sure sees the flowering lawn.
We sure hope so. It is supposed to be. It's always kind of a little, sometimes it's tricky if the recording actually works. It says it is, but there's also, we have on, as Chris was mentioning, on our YouTube channel,
Okay.
we have something that's more specific to the flowering lawn. It's just a little short, couple of minutes about the flowering lawn.
So just go to YouTube and say flowering lawn,
Go
basically.
to YouTube and look for J.C. Ralston Arboretum.
Mhm.
And if you subscribe to our channel, you can subscribe to YouTube channels. You'll get a notice every time a new video is uploaded. And we've got a lot on there. There's a lot of really interesting, great information on there.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
It looked gorgeous.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that.